especially with someone who lived so far away, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. The two of them stopped at a sports bar called For Play. For like golf, where she played pool with a couple other men, while Eric kind of drank a beer and watched, which I thought was really odd. You didn't want to play pool, Eric, but whatever. Maybe you can't. So then they went to a place called Pavilion, and this was a dance club, and Eric wasn't a dancer, so he again kind of just waited while Aimee danced, kind of coincidentally with the two men she had been playing pool with at the sports bar. As 1 a.m. kind of drew nearer, Eric went to use the restroom, and there was kind of a line because it was the end of the night, which I found strange for the men's room, but you know, guys' lines are way shorter than women's. But by the time he got out, he couldn't find Aimee or the two men that she had been dancing with. And this was really odd to Eric because he was her ride home. They were about 40 miles south. She lived about 40 miles south of Portland where they were. Her coat, her cell phone, her purse, and her backpack were all in Eric's rental car. So he came outside and he was like waiting and waiting and waiting, but neither she nor these men ever exited the bar. And he got kind of mad. He thought maybe she left without him, and he was pretty annoyed, and I would have been too. So he decides to drive back to her place, assuming she had gotten home some other way. He stops for gas and then accidentally ends up on a toll road. At the Wells exit, he realized he had no cash, and he talked the toll taker into letting him pass. So he finds his way back to Aimee's house, but she wasn't there. Her car was in the driveway, just like they'd left it that morning. He fished the house key out of Aimee's purse and thought about going inside, but it didn't really seem right to Eric, so he decided he was going to sleep in his rental car. The next morning, he decides he's gotta go in. So he goes in, and her house was pretty tidy. It was filled with family pictures and thriving potted plants. museum visits, and Richard was kind of a couch potato. He said that he just could not keep up with her. So the two of them broke up, but they remained friends. After the breakup, Aimee decided it was time to pursue her dreams. She was beautiful. She was fit but curvy, 5'5", 120 pounds. She had this beautiful mane of strawberry blonde hair and these beautiful blue eyes, and she had daydreamed about modeling. So she decided it's time to do something about it, and she spends quite a bit of money to have these professional photos taken. And these are not like glamour shots at the mall. They were really professional quality. I will try to use one that people said was the best. She's like standing in this dark dress amid a flower garden, and it was just beautiful. So after Richard, she's pursuing her dreams, and she kind of remembers this classmate that she used to have this crush on. His name was Jason. They had worked together at Dunkin' Donuts, but their lives had kind of gone separate ways. After graduation, he'd moved to Florida, he'd gotten married, he'd had a son, and Aimee learned that his wife had passed on, so she planned a visit to Fort Myers to renew their friendship. The trip took place in late September of 2001. During her visit, Jason introduced Aimee to his neighbor, Eric. He was 27, a motorcycle enthusiast and former rugby player. He gave Aimee a ride on his bike, and they sat together on the beach on Sanibel Island. And Eric was captivated by this engaging New Englander. She, as we've already talked about, did not return Eric's enthusiasm. She wasn't willing to commit to a steady man after this 5-year relationship, and it had only been a couple of months, so she just wasn't ready. And Eric lived, 1,500 miles away. But within days of her return to Maine, Eric was calling and emailing and asking if he could visit. She, according to a couple friends, sort of reluctantly agreed, and he arrived in Portland on Thursday, October the 18th. As I said, if he arrived with any ideas about romance, he was disabused of them when he learned of the sleeping arrangements at Aimee's house. He was going to sleep in the spare bedroom, and as an insurance policy against late-night hanky-panky, she had convinced her ex, Richard, to sleep on the sofa. Aimee's mother, Diane Jenkins, got concerned when her daughter did not show up at home on Sunday after her visit to Old Port. It wasn't like her to not show up without telling her parents or going somewhere without arranging for a caretaker for her kitty cat. So she calls the county sheriff's department to inquire about making a missing persons report, and a deputy called a friend who was an officer with the Portland Police Department. Now, there's no immediate evidence of a crime here. For all authorities knew, she had run off with a fling. But the police made a couple inquiries. They tracked down Eric through his rental car and questioned him about the events of that Saturday night. Police thought the scenario described by the Floridian seemed kind of suspicious, and I would too. Aimee disappeared while Eric was standing in line to the bathroom. He then left Old Port alone, found his way back to her house in the middle of the night, slept in his car, didn't go in. Eric agreed to a polygraph test, and the results were inconclusive, but he was extraordinarily nervous during this test. He didn't have any prior history of any criminal activity, so he was understandably nervous. Some investigators were certain that Eric was a killer, but Eric insisted his story of being dumped was odd, but accurate. It was weird, he said. I didn't understand why she had done it. And he suggested that the cops should talk to the first callers to the tip line that was set up to collect information about the missing young women. The caller, the man with the gelled hairdo, was a man named Jeffrey Gorman. He was called Russ. I don't know why. He was 21, and a little background about him. His parents had split up when he was very young, and he had a kind of troubled childhood, bouncing back and forth between his mother in Delray Beach and his grandmother in Alabama. He was just 21 for 10 months on that October weekend that we're talking about. He landed in the Portland area in the year 2000 when his mother Tammy and her boyfriend Rick moved to nearby Scarborough, Maine, to raise golden retriever puppies, which sounds like the best job ever to me. Jeffrey worked as a part-time car detailer and flopped with a group of friends and acquaintances at an apartment on Brighton Avenue in Portland, a short drive from Old Port. By Monday, October 22nd, Aimee's sister and friends had begun posting missing persons flyers in the Old Port area. Friends of Jeffrey saw a poster and recognized Aimee from Jeffrey's encounter Saturday night, and Jeffrey phoned to tell the police what he knew. And investigators invited him to come down for a chat. Jeffrey said he and one of his roommates, Kush Sharma, met Aimee at foreplay. He said they played pool while Eric just stood by, just as Eric had said. They hooked up again at the pavilion, and Jeffrey said Aimee lost track of Eric at closing, so she agreed to go with them to their apartment for an after-hours party. The party kind of failed to materialize, Jeffrey said, and Aimee got pretty uncomfortable being alone at the house with the two men. So he said he drove her back to Old Port and dropped her off in front of the Pavilion nightclub at 1:45 a.m. approximately. He said that he then returned directly home, and his roommate confirmed for the police that he was home and in bed at 2 a.m. So, that following Tuesday morning, the police held a press conference to say that this disappearance was likely a crime. This is not a typical missing persons, said Portland Police Chief Michael Chitwood. All investigative leads lead to the fact that there is something criminal happening here. Her loved ones stood beside the police chief and added testimonials. Her mother Diane said she had begun to fear the worst when Aimee failed to show up at work on Monday. This was an unfathomable act by her ambitious daughter. Something happened to this girl, Jenkins said. She did not just walk away. 2 days later, the family held another press conference, which they again pleaded for Aimee's safe return and offered a $35,000 reward. In the meantime, police had been further able to confirm Eric's seemingly unlikely account of the events of that Saturday night. A security camera had captured him buying gas at 1:38 a.m., and the police were able to locate the toll taker who allowed him to pass about 15 minutes later. As it became more evident that Eric was telling the truth, investigators began to sharpen their focus on Jeffrey Russ Gorman. I think I call him Jeffrey that whole time. Jeffrey, I'm just going to stick with that, struck investigators as curiously skittish for someone who phoned them as a volunteer for information as a witness in a missing persons case. He put off police officers' request to take a polygraph, saying he needed to get a lawyer first. He also said he was just too busy to allow the police to forensically test his car, the last place that Aimee was known to be seen. So, police decide to interview his roommates, seeking collaboration of his account to Aimee's visit to their house. He added a couple of details to his alibi. He said that his roommate Jason had been on the computer when he got home, and he was sending a message to his aunt's email in Florida. Jeffrey also said he recalled making a phone call, but he just couldn't remember to who. Police inspected the computers of both Jason and the aunt, but they did of interest to the leading suspect in Aimee St. Laurent's case. Dave said he and his girlfriend Dawn had went out for early breakfast after midnight on Sunday morning, when Aimee had supposedly visited their apartment, right? When they got home between 3 and 3:15, Jeffrey wasn't even there, although he had told the police, "Yeah, I was home in bed by 2 o'clock. Dave also said he had woken up at about 4:30 or 5 a.m. that morning to use the restroom, and Jeffrey was in there, washing up, still fully clothed, as though he had just arrived home from the night before. Police then kind of put the pressure on the other roommate, Kush, to submit a polygraph on his statement that Jeffrey had been back home and asleep by 2. When he was facing the machine, Kush Sharma changed his story. He now said he could only be certain that Jeffrey Gorman was home at 4:15 a.m. So these contradictions really put new urgency to the police. They really want to search Jeffrey's car, a Pontiac red sedan that was notoriously filthy inside and out. But there's kind of a twist here, as another friend of this guy calls the police with a tip that within 36 hours of Aimee's disappearance, Jeffrey had done a deluxe bumper-to-bumper detail job on the car. And Jeffrey himself underwent a personal makeover. When he was first interviewed by the police, he had maintained this wholesome look. He had this gelled hair of his blonde tips and this boyish look about him. 2 weeks later, he had gone from all-American to looking like a roadie for a heavy metal band. He had multiple piercings, a shaved head, and several new tattoos. Like, dude, where did you get this money from? What? About a month after Aimee's disappearance, Portland Police Detective Danny Young made a just-in-case inquiry to the National Crime Information Center to see if Jeffrey or his car had stopped by law enforcement in recent months. And he got back, like, a stunning result. NCIC records showed Jeffrey had been stopped by the police for a headlight violation in Portland, a suburb of Westbrook, at 3:14 a.m. on the morning that Aimee went missing, more than an hour after he claimed to be at home in bed. At roughly the same time, police learned that Jeffrey's mother's boyfriend, sorry, I know there's a lot of people in this case, that Jeffrey had borrowed a shovel from him 2 nights after the night in Oldport. And investigators grew increasingly convinced that Jeffrey Gorman had killed Aimee and buried her somewhere. But where? In early December, 6 weeks after her disappearance, the police agencies involved held a sit-down to kind of mull over the locations in which Aimee could possibly be. They came up with 19 likely sites, from Casco Bay to various wooded and remote locations in the Portland vicinity. At dawn on December 8th, a force of more than 100 police officers, search and rescue team members, mounted what Portland Captain Laughlin called our last-ditch effort to find Aimee. One of the 19 sites was a wooded area dotted with ponds off busy Route 22 in Scarborough, a 10-minute drive from Oldport. It was regarded as a promising venue because it was just minutes from Westbrook, where Jeffrey had gotten this headlight violation, and his mother's house, where he borrowed the shovel. Jeffrey knew this area well. One team, using search dogs from the Maine Warden Service, spent most of the day combing the wooded expanse, which covered several hundred acres. At 2:30 p.m., after 8 hours of work, the team was trudging along a long-abandoned, overgrown macadam road which cut through a swath of thick overgrowth, and a volunteer stepped on a patch of loose earth. So the Warden Service brought in a cadaver dog, who hid. The earth below had been disturbed in the recent past. 30 minutes later, Detective Young was on his hands and knees at the site, carefully troweling the soil, until he found what he was looking for. A bit of gray fleece, matching the Pratt & Whitney sweatshirt that Aimee had been wearing when she vanished. It revealed no bodily fluids that could be tested for DNA, and the murder weapon has never been located. Just before Aimee was found, Jeffrey decided he was going to get right out of town. Police were watching him very carefully, though, and investigators debated on whether they should let him go in the first place. But at the time, they felt as though they had insufficient evidence in order to charge him. So they did not intervene when Jeffrey went to Troy, Alabama. But when he got back to his other hometown, I guess, he helped solve the problem of not having any evidence against him. At 2:30 p.m. on December 9th, he called his mother, Tammy Westbrook. The two of them had a pretty difficult relationship, and he apparently blamed his mother's distracted parenting for his problems with crime. And that day, he called her to make a confession because the truth was just eating at him. In a series of phone conversations over the prior 6 weeks, she had pressed him to tell her the truth about his involvement in Aimee's case, and he denied it all until that phone call, exactly 24 hours after she was found. "Mom," he said, "I did it. I killed that girl." During the 22 conversation, Shannon, he explained he had been walking with Aimee in the woods near one of the lakes behind his mother's house. He claimed that she had said something that had irritated him, and he started beating on her and eventually shot her. He then added this kind of bizarre detail that if I was his mom, I would have been really offended at. He kind of blamed her. He said that during this event, he imagined he had been killing her instead of Aimee. He claimed that he had just snapped. Okay, dude. So after admitting this to his mother, he started to lose it. He committed a couple of strange incidents. On December 11th, he pulled a gun on a man outside a gas station. He claimed the man was staring at him, so he pulled his gun and he was like, "What are you looking at, bro?" The victim, of course, reported the incident to the police, and the next day, officers cornered him at the home of a family friend. And he had a standoff for nearly 6 hours, threatening suicide with the 2 guns that he had in his hands. Ultimately, he gave himself up. He traded his guns for a cigarette and a soda, and he was extradited back to Maine with a probation violation charge unrelated to Aimee's case. Meanwhile, Tammy was distraught that her son had admitted this murder to her, so she calls this friend, and the friend is like, "Tammy, you need to call the police. He admitted it. You need to tell them." And she was like, "I can't. He's my baby." So this friend was like, "Okay, I'll do it." Tammy refused to tell the police, so she was hauled in front of a grand jury under the threat of criminal charges for contempt of court. And on February 8th, 2002, she sat in the grand jury witness seat and gave a full account of the phone call from her son, breaking into sobs and just crying on several occasions, which I do understand. But, is that aiding and abetting? The grand jury indicted Jeffrey Gorman for the murder, and his trial was docketed to begin January 13th, 2003. By then, Tammy claimed to have developed amnesia, and she couldn't remember anything about that phone call from her son. She insisted she had not even recalled giving testimony to the grand jury. Can you see my face? Okay. So this placed prosecutor William Stokes in a pinch because his case hinged on Tammy's testimony. Unlike spouses, parents can be compelled to testify in criminal trials, but what good would she be on the witness stand if she said she couldn't remember any of it? So Stokes made a risky legal gambit. He asked Judge Mills to allow the prosecution to play a recording of her grand jury testimony, normally a sealed secret heard by only the 20 grand jury members, a judge, and the attorneys. "Okay, Mom, I'll tell you what happened. I did it," she said. Sobbing, she went on to explain that her son said he had imagined he was killing her and not Aimee, and that he had snapped that morning. On the recording, Tammy said, Why? Why? I love you. I've always loved you." And he said, "I love you too, Mom." And she added, "I'll never forget it as long as I live." And yet she had, somewhere between the grand jury testimony and her trial appearance less than a year later. Stokes was incredulous, and the jurors' common sense appeared to agree. The trial was effectively brief, and Jeffrey did not testify on his own behalf. The jury returned a guilty verdict, and Judge Mills handed down a sentence of 60 years in prison. The state of Maine does not have the death penalty. A year later, the Maine Supreme Judicial Court considered his appeal, based on the playing of his mother's recorded grand jury testimony. Tammy sat in the gallery reading the Bible and told a reporter, "My son is innocent. In my heart, he's a good boy. This is in the Lord's hands now." Her prayers were not answered. The High Court justices let the conviction stand. Moments after he was convicted, Jeffrey Gorman turned towards Aimee's loved ones and mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." Many who witnessed this incident assumed that it was an admission of guilt, but just hours later in an interview, he denied that. He claimed the gesture implied no guilt. He just maintained that he was commiserating with them for what they had been through. He added, "If I was in their places and I thought someone killed my daughter, I would hate that person, and I would want to see that person put away for a long time." He said he was aware of his public image. He was aware people thought he was a monster. It was a telling interview, and Jeffrey was smug, defiant, defensive. He insisted that the use of his mother's taped testimony violated every right and every rule, and he said that he had never confessed to his mother, and he didn't know why she told the grand jury that he had, and he did acknowledge that they had a pretty troubled relationship. "I love her a lot. We've had difficulties, but doesn't every family? It's not like she was chasing me